Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to get into some really interesting material you shared. It's a chapter that really digs into human nature, doesn't it? And how we interact.
It does. Specifically, it looks at this maybe slightly counterintuitive way to influence people.
Right. So we're pulling insights from quite a range of real-world examples in this text.
Yeah, and the central question is sort of, what if you ditch the usual tactics?
You mean like pointing out the practical benefits or, the downsides if they don't cooperate, maybe even leaning on them a bit.
Exactly. What if instead of all that, you appealed to something else, like their sense of what's right?
Their idealism, or maybe their honor.
Or just that fundamental desire most of us have to see ourselves as, a good person, a decent person.
Okay, so that's what this material explores. It's suggesting this isn't just wishful thinking.
No, not at all. It argues it can be incredibly effective. Why? Because, well, at the end of the day, most people hold themselves in pretty high regard.
They genuinely want to believe they're good, unselfish individuals.
Precisely.
Yeah.
There's that saying, I think it was J. Pierpont Morgan, that people usually have two reasons for doing things.
Ah, yes, the one that sounds good.
In the real one.
Right.
And while we might know the real reason deep down, the point here is that often what really moves us, what compels us, are those motives that sound good, the ones that fit our preferred self-image.
Okay. So the core principle we're sort of uncovering here is
appeal to the nobler motives.
Appeal to the nobler motives. Okay. Does that really hold up in the real world? Business deals, negotiations, getting people to just cooperate. It sounds a little optimistic.
It can seem that way, yeah. But the material offers some pretty compelling examples, actually.
Okay.
It starts with a fascinating observation. It suggests that even people we might think of as, well, less than noble figures like Jesse James, Al Capone, they likely had their own internal narrative. Some justification, maybe even a warped kind of idealism that allowed them to see themselves in a certain light.
So you're not excusing their actions, obviously.
Absolutely not. But it highlights this really deep human thing. We build a positive self-image, however distorted it might look from the outside.
That's a really powerful starting point. Because if they operate even partly from some internal place, they justify as good or right.
Then appealing to that internal ideal suddenly seems like it could be incredibly potent for, well, everyone else.
So where do we see this applied successfully in the examples? Walk us through one.
Okay, well, one story is about a property owner, Hamilton J. Farrell. He had a tenant who wanted to break his lease early. Like 4 months early.
Right. And the standard approach would be?
Confrontation, probably. Waive the lease agreement, talk about legal action, demand the rent. Farrell himself noted that.
That's what most landlords would do, I imagine. Lay down the law.
Definitely. But Farrell, he took a completely different route. He told the tenant, basically, look, I've heard you, but I just don't believe you really intend to move.
Straight to the character assessment.
Right. He said his experience taught him how to size people up, and he'd pegged this tenant as, quote, a man of your word.
A man of his word. Okay, so bypassing the contract details, the money.
And going straight for the tenant's integrity, his reputation, his self-image.
Did he leave it there?
No, he kind of doubled down. He proposed a sort of gamble, told the tenant to think it over for a few days.
Okay.
If he still wanted to leave by the rent due date, Farrell would accept it, admit he'd misjudged his character.
Putting his own judgment on the line, too.
Exactly. But then he really drove it home, repeating his belief that the tenant was a man of his word, that he would honor the contract. And he added this line, for after all, we are either men or monkeys, and the choice usually lies with ourselves.
Wow. Men or monkeys. That's quite a statement, a direct challenge to his sense of honor.
It is very direct, so the outcome.
I'm guessing it worked.
It did. When the rent was due, the tenant came in, paid up, said he and his wife decided the only honorable thing was to stick to the lease.
That's amazing. The logic, the self-interest, might have pointed to just leaving, right? Daring Farrell to sue?
Sure. But that appeal to his honor, his self-respect, it completely reframed it for him.
So this principle pops up elsewhere, too.
Yeah, different contexts, like Lord Northcliffe, the newspaper magnate. He wanted to stop a specific photo of himself being published.
Okay. Vanity?
Maybe partly, but he didn't frame it that way. He didn't issue an order. Instead, he wrote to his editor appealing to a widely held value, respect for one's mother.
How did he phrase it?
He wrote something like, please don't publish that picture of me anymore. My mother doesn't like it.
Huh. That's clever. Using his mother's feelings, something relatable and, well, noble.
Exactly. Or think about John D. Rockefeller Jr. wanting photographers to stop snapping pictures of his kids.
Another privacy issue.
But again, he didn't just demand it based on his status. He appealed to the photographer's own likely experiences, their empathy as parents.
Ah, finding common ground.
Right. He basically said, you know how it is, boys. Some of you have kids yourselves, and you know it's not good for youngsters to get too much publicity.
Making it about the kid's well-being, not just his own desire for privacy, connecting on that shared value concern for children.
Precisely. And then there's the story of Cyrus H.K. Curtis, the publisher. He needed top authors, like Louisa May Alcott.
The author of Little Women.
That's the one. But he couldn't pay the same high fees as other magazines.
So, a negotiation problem.
But instead of just haggling over the price, he appealed to her idealism. He offered to send the payment not to her, but to her favorite charity.
Wow. So Louisa May Alcott, famous author, agrees to write for less money because it's going to a good cause.
Apparently so. It's a powerful example, isn't it? Idealism winning out over purely financial motivation, all because the appeal hit that nobler motive.
Okay, these examples are persuasive. But what about the really tough situations? Like trying to collect money from someone who seems dead set against paying.
Ah, yes. That feels like the real stress test for this idea, doesn't it?
It does. Does appealing to nobility work when someone isn't exactly showing that side?
Well, the text gives us the story from a James L. Thomas. He had to deal with 6 customers who were refusing to pay for car servicing. They all disputed some charge they had actually signed off on initially.
Okay, so the company felt they were clearly in the right contractually.
Technically, yes.
And what was the first attempt to collect from the credit department?
It was pretty much what you'd expect, the standard confrontational playbook.
Meaning?
According to the text, they visited the customer, said the bill was overdue, insisted the company was right, the customer was wrong. They even kind of implied they knew more about cars than the customers did.
Oof. Yeah, I can see how that would go down like a lead balloon.
It absolutely did. Arguments flared up. None of the accounts got settled.
Shocking. Telling someone they're wrong and you're smarter usually builds bridges, right?
Hardly. Thankfully, the general manager stepped in. He realized these are normally customers who paid on time.
So he figured the method was the problem, not necessarily the customers?
Exactly. He asked James L. Thomas to take a crack at collecting these supposedly uncollectible accounts.
Okay, so how did Thomas apply this nobler motives idea to debt collection? That sounds tricky.
He flipped the script completely. He went to see each customer, but not to demand money.
Okay, what then?
His stated purpose was to figure out what the company had done wrong.
Whoa. Okay, immediately shifting the focus, not blaming the customer, looking at the company's potential mistakes. That's a huge shift.
It is. He made it clear he was there to investigate, admitting up front, the company wasn't perfect. He said he was interested only in their car.
Focusing on their specific situation.
And crucially, he told the customer that they knew more about their specific car than anyone else in the world. He positioned the customer as the ultimate expert.
Validating them.
Yeah.
Making them feel heard and respected right off the bat.
Totally. Then he just listened really intently with a genuine interest and sympathy, letting them vent, get it all out.
Letting them air the grievance fully.
Right. And only once they seemed calmer, then Thomas made his appeal. First, he apologized for how the company had handled things, for the hassle.
Okay, taking responsibility.
Then he appealed directly to their sense of fair play, their patience.
Fairness. That definitely feels like a nobler motive.
It is. And then he laid out his proposal. He said something like, and now, because you are fair-minded and patient, see how he's reinforcing that positive image.
Yeah, priming them almost.
I'm going to ask you to do something for me. It's something that you can do better than anyone else. Here is your bill. I know it is safe for me to ask you to adjust it, just as you would do if you were the president of my company. I'm going to leave it all up to you. Whatever you say goes.
Wow. He just handed over complete control.
Total empowerment. Framed it as a task only they could do properly. Appealing to fairness, responsibility, like they were the CEO making the call.
Appealing to that desire to be seen as fair, capable, trustworthy.
Oh.
So what happened? Did they just wipe the slate clean?
Well, one customer did refuse to pay the disputed part, just that bit.
Okay, 1 out of 6.
But the other 5, they all adjusted the bill, but in the company's favor.
Get out. Seriously. When given total control and appealed to based on fairness, most of them chose to pay more than they strictly had to.
That's what the text reports. It's pretty remarkable.
It really is.
And maybe the most striking part, the Punchline, really. Within the next 2 years, the company sold new cars to all 6 of those customers.
No way. They didn't just resolve 5 disputes favorably. They turned 6 unhappy customers into repeat buyers, new car buyers.
Exactly. It's a huge testament to the approach. It really backs up James L. Thomas's conclusion in the text.
Which was
That basically, when you don't know a customer's specific intent, the safest bet, the best foundation, is to assume they are sincere, honest, truthful, and willing to pay if they're convinced the charges are fair and correct.
assume honesty first. Treat people as trustworthy.
That's the core of it. He found that even people who might be tempted to, chisel or find an angle often respond really positively when you make it clear you see them as honest, upright, and fair.
Okay, so pulling all these threads together, the Tennant, Northcliffe, Rockefeller, Alcott, and this incredible collection story, the principle that keeps emerging from this material is,
Appeal to the nobler motives.
yeah, it's about recognizing that deep down, people want to think well of themselves.
And if you frame your request, your interaction, in a way that aligns with that positive self-image, their sense of fairness, honor, idealism, compassion, it can be surprisingly effective.
Often much more so, it seems, than just focusing on the practicalities or getting confrontational.
Definitely. Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, it really seems clear that looking beyond the purely self-interested reasons someone might act, that's a pretty powerful lens.
Yeah, absolutely. By appealing to what this text calls the nobler motives,
Yeah.
that sense of, idealism, the desire to be good, you can get results that might seem, well, impossible otherwise.
We saw it with the tenant staying put out of honor.
The authors contributing for charity.
Even those customers adjusting bills against their own immediate financial interest because they were trusted and treated as fair. It all points back to that core insight, doesn't it?
That people really do like to think of themselves as good, as unselfish.
Right. And that James L. Thomas story especially, it really drives home that starting by assuming honesty, treating people as trustworthy even when there's conflict, that can genuinely turn things around.
From an adversarial situation to, 6 new car sales down the line, that's remarkable.
It really is. It makes you think about your own interactions, doesn't it?
It does. This whole idea, understanding the deep desire we have to maintain a positive self-image, it feels like a really practical tool for everyday conversations and challenges.
A very powerful tool.
So maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener, to kind of mull over as you go about your day. How often do we just automatically jump to the practical arguments, the financial ones? Or maybe even get a bit adversarial when we need something or there's a disagreement.
It's often the default, isn't it?
It feels like it.
Yeah.
So the question is, what opportunities might we be missing? What doors might stay closed because we don't pause and consider appealing to those nobler motives that might be sitting right there waiting to be engaged in the people we interact with every day?
Definitely something to ponder.